Do you feel that in a time when we are more connected than ever, we are drifting away from real human connections, especially to ourselves? I do. Hi, I'm Leticia Latino, and I want to invite you to join me and my very inspiring guests in exploring ways to reconnect to your essence, to your definite purpose, to what makes you tick. Are you ready? Hello and welcome back to a new episode of Back to Basics, Reconnecting to the Essence of You. Today we have Brandt Handley on the show. Brandt is an accomplished executive recruiter with experience serving large multinational corporations, startup enterprises, and middle market companies in the U.S. Following a 20-year career with Procter & Gamble and Walt Disney, Brandt established ROI in 2009. The premier U.S. middle market executive recruiter to better serve the growing top executive talent needs of the middle market companies. Brandt is also the host of a podcast called Into the Corner Office. In his podcast, he has powerful conversations with CEOs about their journey in getting to that office. I am a proud guest of episode 28 of that show, and that's how I met Brandt. Brandt, thank you so much for accepting my invitation to be on this show.
Oh, Leticia, it's wonderful to be here, and thank you for extending the invitation.
Well, you know, when we first talk on that podcast, which is fantastic, and I really, really advise you to check it out if you are not familiar with it, you know, you sparked something in me because these kind of activities, talking, interviewing, just sharing knowledge is something that has always resonated within me. And so it happens that at some point in the past few months, I saw this opportunity about how to learn to do podcasts and to get involved with it. And I just jumped at that opportunity. So when I put my list of potential guests, definitely you had to be in there because you planted that seed in me, and I wanted to publicly acknowledge that, and thank you for inspiring me to move forward with this.
Well, thank you so much, Leticia. And, you know, it is a very inspirational thing to do this type of work, and I'm very glad and pleased to hear that this is something that's motivated you, and very, very excited about what you're doing as well.
Thank you so much. And you know, my podcast is called Back to Basics, and it's about reconnecting to who we are. And you speak to a lot of CEOs. Obviously, that's all the guests in your podcast are really high-level executives, and then you do talent recruiting for a living. So that component about certain qualities in each individual and who the best person is for certain jobs is really important to you and what you do. And what I recognize in some of my conversations in the business field and also on the personal side is that sometimes people are not fulfilled with what they're doing, or they're not really motivated and they're not living the life they want. So that's why I had the idea of inviting inspiring people such as yourself and have them share, you know, their journey and who they were as a kid, which is going to be my first question, and then guiding me and my audience into that journey and hopefully inspiring us to see what adjustments can we make in our day-to-day lives to really achieving the life we want. Having said that, why don't you share with us about your background, your upbringing, and mostly I want to know who were you as a kid, what you fantasized about, what were your dreams about, what did you really like to do as a kid?
Well, thank you so much. And grew up in Southern California, the youngest of three brothers. Mom and dad stayed married for over 40 years when my dad passed away at a young age in his early 70s, but was a terrific role model. Education was a very important part of our lives. My dad was an educator. He was a PhD and taught school for many years, and then was a elementary school principal. So, you know, the focus on getting good grades and going to school and, you know, kind of being that focus on learning was always a very important part in our household, and I benefited from that. Interestingly, I was thinking back to some of those childhood dreams. I actually was very inspired by going to Disneyland as a kid. We were in Southern California, and went up to Anaheim often. And I remember actually building Handley Land, right, where I envisioned having all these various rides and things. I think I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and made models and drawings of it. And then later in life, I actually went to work for Disney for about 10 years.
Wow, so no coincidence there, I think.
It's amazing sometimes how those childhood dreams can come true. And, I worked both in the consumer products as well as the theme park business later in life. But, I think pursuing your dreams is a very important part of what one is. And, getting that education was something that was important for me. I didn't quite go to the PhD level like my dad, but, finished top in my class in high school, went on and got an honors position in my undergraduate degree. And, I think another area that was very fascinating to me, Letitia, was travel. Being the youngest of three and my brothers being, 7 and 10 years older, I benefited from traveling with my parents, first to Mexico and then to Europe and various ports in the Caribbean. So at a very early age, I had an exposure to languages, se habla español también, and studied that growing up in California. And, I ended up studying an international business degree because I really enjoyed travel, and I felt that I wanted to be able to leverage my language and my joy of travel with school. And sure enough, when I was 20 and graduated from college, I ended up going abroad, and I didn't come back to the U.S. for 20 years. And spent a good part of my early adult life in professional positions with two great companies, as you mentioned in the biography, Procter & Gamble and then Disney. And again, that was another, very inspiring dream at an early age. So, I'm glad you asked that question. I think that's a very important part of who I am and who others can be. Dream big, reach for the stars. And if you get to the moon, that's okay. Mm-hmm. I never did create Handley Land, but I did certainly have a big influence. Actually created a theme park that traveled through Asia. That was a traveling park that led to Hong Kong Disneyland and then Shanghai and other expansions. And then, in my international career, just had some wonderful experiences doing a lot of new office building out, a lot of new business creation, and that, of course, led ultimately to my work in talent, executive recruitment. And, I've really found my passion in that career. So dreaming big is certainly something that I firmly agree with and was a big part of who I became as an adult from some of the dreams I had as a child.
Wow, that's fascinating, Brandt. I mean, hearing what you were doing as a kid, that's pretty amazing, that fascination with Disney, and then you ended up working there. And when I read your bio, one of my questions also later on was going to be, how was it to work in Disney? Because this is a company that, sells themselves as, we make dreams come true, or this is, like a dream. You're there. And I took my daughter 2 weeks ago, and I was telling a friend of mine that works there, I say, does it ever stop, like this excitement you feel? I mean, I'm 45. I still get very excited when I walk into Magic Kingdom.
It's true. I do too.
Right? And she said, no, I've been working here 7 years, and I still get excited.
Yeah.
And so you probably also had to balance the fact that, yes, this is the company, what they do, but at the same time, there's, the political, maybe, procedural aspect of any company.
Sure.
So was that interesting to you, working in a place that it's so, amazing, but then in the back door, you get to deal with the day-to-day? That might be like any other company? It's
still work. Letitia, it's still work. And, both my employers, I was about 9 years with Procter and about 10 years with Disney after that. So, a big part of my formative adult years were with those two companies, and they're both terrifically run companies. But yeah, they're politics. There were issues that I had. I had a lot of good bosses, but, a few ones that also, I'd put on the other side of the ledger to be kind. And, what you learn, of course, in those companies is that it's hard work to be good. And, I certainly have enjoyed a lot of the key principles that I learned, particularly at Procter in the early days, how to write, how to communicate. I grew up in the brand marketing organization, so I learned a lot about the principles behind marketing. Of course, those all turned upside down when we got into the 2000s, and now everyone does social media and having to learn it all over again. But I think a lot of those principles still applied. With Disney, the focus was really on the customer. What did you need to do in order to really make the best customer experience? And that's hard. You've got to put your ego aside. You've got to be humble. You've got to really focus on what it is that's the best for them. And, I'm sure I made mistakes along the way, but I really enjoyed that aspect of learning from that company, because I think that's where they really have become special. They so much focus on making that guest experience. They don't call them customers, they call them guests, right? Yeah. And making that guest experience wonderful for every single person. And sometimes, it's just one person one day that you can make something very magical happen. And that then creates the magic for you as well. And, those were terrific lessons to learn. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that, the politics and the bureaucracy were there. There were a lot of things that, as I grew up and became more mature, that I realized that, I did want to be more entrepreneurial. I've been running my own business now for 10 years. I've been recruiting for 15. But I have to say, I look back with no regrets. I'm glad I had that very solid foundation of two wonderful companies, learning a lot of terrific principles, because I think in my own businesses now, and particularly with regards to making dreams come true for my candidates and my executives, right, and finding the jobs that they want, I apply many of those same principles.
Well, that's great. That's great. And then I want to go back to when you mentioned you went away for 20 years, you went traveling. In terms of your job, probably took you to all these exciting places. And in those 20 years, you are exposed to new cultures, new places to live, new cities. Were there any moments where you struggled with staying true to who you are? I imagine that, when you have this abundance of new things happening to you, you start you go on overdrive. Yep. I've lived abroad myself. And so if that happened, what did you do, or how did you stay true to who you were?
Very good question. It was two examples, one from each company. I didn't intend to go abroad for 20 years. It kind of happened that way, right? But after graduation, I was involved in an organization where I did some international internships, and that led to my first full-time job with Procter. And at P&G, after a first year of kind of getting assimilated with some businesses in the Caribbean, believe it or not, and including Venezuela, your home, I worked on the Middle East. And that was a real challenge. I was 23, 24 years old. I didn't know a lot about it culturally. I'd been kind of developed as a card-charging young brand assistant for Procter & Gamble. And I was very, not in tune with the cultural differences of what happened in the Middle East. And I think on my very first trip down there, I stepped on a lot of toes. I made some insults. And I remember literally my boss telling me, gosh, we got a real problem. And I found out later one of the general managers had been called by one of the Saudi customers, and they wanted to let me go.
Oh, wow.
And, I had a boss who was Lebanese, grew up in the Middle East, who probably in his right, mind would have joined me for that trip, but I think he had a personal conflict or what have you and sent me down there on his own. And, he laid down the sword, and he basically told that general manager that, look, this is my fault. I sent Brandt down, on his own. He'd never been to the Middle East before. And, he was the one who stood up for me and, got me a pass on that particular situation. And then on the next couple of trips went with me. And I learned so much through him. His name was Samir Hawa. He's retired now. But, I learned a couple of things, first of all, about the culture from him and had some pretty exciting stories. But I also learned what it meant to be a true leader. And that is to be able to admit your mistakes and be able to stand up next to someone when, those mistakes impact someone as brutally as they had with me. Because the last thing I wanted to do was, get fired from my first job. So that was a life-changing experience. And, I've always been very attuned to learning more about the cultures before I travel, even some bits of language, et cetera, because I learned the hard way that not doing so, really put my career at risk. Another experience several years later, probably about a decade or so later, was with Walt Disney. And I had been probably about 6-9 months or so in the job, and I was in Asia, in Singapore. I had an Australian boss that I had really admired and enjoyed working with. And in the first 6-12 months of that work, I was really, kicking it, hitting my goals, if not exceeding it. I had my, 10 years of Procter experience. But again, in another way, I wasn't as familiar with the Disney culture, which was very different from Procter. Both are very successful companies, but Disney is very creative, much more easygoing, collaborative, whereas Procter was very hard charging and very disciplined in their approach. And of course, not being culturally, adapted to that company culture, I was the hard charging, person who was delivering it. And I'll never forget, my boss was in Hong Kong and I was in Singapore, and he flew down, and said, I want to meet you at 10 a.m. and, I'll come to the airport. And I was like, gosh, what's this is all about? And so forth. And I remember him walking to my office, says, come and join me, walked in our conference room, didn't even sit down. And so, of course, I didn't sit down either, and basically said he got a lot of complaints from various employees, and that bottom line, I needed to shape up or ship out and fix it in 6 months or you're gone. And he picked up his briefcase and walked out. It was a 15-minute meeting. Wow. And I was stunned because I wasn't getting a lot of feedback, but I knew that bottom line, I knew I needed to change something, and I knew that it wasn't about the business because I was delivering that. It was about, how I was treating people. And I went to an executive recruiter that I'd used across the street who happened to be there in Singapore and presented my case. And he said, you need an executive coach. And of course, this is back in the, early 90s and not something that was generally done. Anyway, long story short, introduced me to a guy by the name of Brian Bowerly. Brian did a whole, slew of tests on me, the tests that I use all the time now in terms of psychographic and psychometric measurement. And, he said, Brandt, this is going to be really easy. You just need to use your feminine side.
Okay.
I said, what's that? But, he coached me on how to better listen and interact and kind of get away from that Procter hard charging to much more of an assimilative, collaborative type of culture. And I guess the big reward on that was not only did I get promoted in about 6 months, but then my boss, who to be honest was a lot more like me, ended up hiring that same consultant and worked with him throughout his whole management team.
Oh, wow.
That former boss is a good friend. In fact, one of my partners in one of my businesses is his son-in-law. We worked together for 10 years and we've been friends for 25. And, it was a very important experience, again, about how to adapt to company culture and the importance of doing that in, new environments. In Asia, of course, very, very different, again, than the Middle East and our Western cultures. And that was a very valuable and learning experience for me.
Well, very interesting. I mean, I can only imagine all those experiences you've gathered working for so long within cultures that are so very different than ours. So that's fantastic. Now, moving into, the work-life balance that a lot of people like to touch upon, because you got a very demanding career, traveling abroad. How did that play out for you? Was it easy? Was it hard?
There were some challenges with it because I was so hard charging and I traveled a lot, and some difficulties and damage along the way. I'm in my second marriage, and I would say that I attribute the dissolving of my first marriage to the fact that I didn't have that right balance. I spent a lot more time traveling. The joke always was that my ex-wife and I would say that we lived in Singapore for 10 years, and she'd correct me and she says, no, I've lived here for 10 years. You've lived here for 5. right? Because I was working so frequently. So, there was a lot of things that I missed. My kids are now in their 20s, and there were, events and so forth that I missed growing up. I always tried to be there, but, I really did put my career first. And I've been happily married now for almost 15 years. And, I certainly have tried to strike a better balance. And I think, part of that is really finding the passion of the work that you like and being able to think about it, not as work, right? But as something that you really enjoy. And I've been blessed with ROI and what we do in executive search with that. And running your own business, as I'm sure you know as well, having grown up in a family business, is you've got a lot more flexibility with regards to, when you work and how you work.
Absolutely.
My wife doesn't mind if I put in a couple of, 10, 12-hour days, because she knows that I can take, a day or two off and enjoy us together. For example, after our podcast today, I'm in Connecticut today and at our home here, and I'm taking my wife into the city for a surprise meal and a show. Oh, nice. And, something that, she doesn't know much about. Hopefully she's not listening in the other room. But doing those types of things, and I think finding that balance is very, very key. And, it frankly took me 20 years and going through a couple of different major corporations and one marriage to get to that. Yeah. I'm a slow learner, Leticia.
No, I think you're with most people, and this is why it has always been a fascination for me. I got married a little later. It took me a while to find the right person. So I got married at 34. And I remember right when I was about to get married, probably a month before, I was at the beauty salon and I'm reading a book about divorce. Oh, boy. So everybody around me was like, "Are you crazy?" And I say, I want to learn these things before they happen. I don't want to read the book after it happened,
You're smart.
And it was so valuable. And when I sit down with people, even business, and they tell me, well, I was married before for 22 years. And I hear this a lot. I was married 22 years and we got divorced. And it was just my 10-year anniversary. So I want to know about these people because I want to know about what happened, because most of the times are things like this. Well, I put career first, and maybe I could have avoided it. And I want to understand the signs so that I can prevent them. And obviously, it's not the main subject of this podcast, but it is in a way, because as long as you stay true of about yourself and who you are, I think you have a higher chance to, make it in every aspect of your life, professionally and personally. And hearing you saying, when I started my own company, then a whole lot of different windows open, because now I can do this and I can do that. And a lot of people, I think, they believe they have no options when in reality they have a lot of options. It's just that fear of committing to their dreams what makes them stop on their tracks.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I wouldn't be lying to you if I said it hasn't had its challenges, because, when you run your own business, particularly in the early days, there's always a lot of risk there and the rewards don't come. But, I think, again, being true to your passion with the work you do, but ensuring that you keep things in perspective, that, family is first and, you're working to live, not living to work.
Absolutely. And you have to work with people you enjoy working with. At least I talk about with other entrepreneurs and people that, we get flexibility into choosing who we partner with or which route we go. And we say, ultimately, I don't want to work with a jerk. I don't want to work with this guy that just walks in, treats everybody badly just because he has money and he can fund us. And that staying true to that essence is hard because, as you say, you have other demands and your business has other demands. But at the same time, you have to think about, does this represent the essence of my business and what I want to achieve, and personally, how does impact me?
Absolutely.
And so that's great. And, the one thing that motivated me to do this podcast is the question about what makes us tick. Like, what is it within us what is it that you're doing? If you had 1 hour to go somewhere and you say, I did this and I feel alive, I feel I'm Brandt, this is really what I'm all about. Is there anything that goes to your mind when I say these words?
It sounds a little corny, Leticia, but but my response is very simple. I really love impacting people's lives. One of the very first placements I made 8-9 years ago when I started this company is still working for that company. And I had dinner with him in his second location. He's been recently relocated. And, he looks younger. He looks happier. It makes me so proud. And, I got paid for that years ago, right? But I stay in touch with him. He's not only given me business in the past, but he's been a great friend. He's been a resource when I've had other searches. He's a VP of manufacturing and supply chain for a major consumer products company. And I'll go to him, and he's very quick to respond. I have a little note in my calendar every year when he hits his anniversary date, and I always drop him a note. And, for me, that's the intrinsic benefit of what I do. Now, I'd like to say that all of my placements have stayed. That's not, in fact, the case. Probably 10% or so of the 15 or 18 I do every year. So multiply that by 10 years. There's probably 15 or 20 folks that haven't been able to stay, but the vast majority have. And I take great pride in that. Not only because it helps me with my business, and when people ask me as a potential prospect, what can I say about my service? That's one of the things I cite. And many of those placements, as well as my clients, are willing to talk to my prospects about them. And the fact that half my business every year is repeat is testimony to the fact that, the work I do is very much appreciated. That means a lot to me. A job is a very important part of what a person does over the course of their lives. Typically, they spend more time doing that than sleeping or even spending time with their family. And therefore, they're major life decisions. And, being a small part in making a connection with someone that moves into a job where they just truly love it and they're able to change their lives because of it is something that, really makes what I do quite, happy, makes me a happy man, but also makes me feel quite accomplished in the work that I do.
It's a meaningful job. You're really making an impact in what you're doing and in the lives of people you touch. You're a matchmaker in a way.
Yeah, pretty much so. Yeah.
So
just as a real estate agent may take pride in selling someone their dream home, I take great pride in matching someone with their dream job.
Well, that's no small achievement, Brandt, and I'm witness that you like also to build relationships and nurture relationships, because we never met in person, unfortunately, but in the interaction we had initially when I was part of your podcast, you were able to do that very efficiently. And I think that's also something that comes natural to you, and you being able to translate those trends and that passion into what you're doing on a daily basis. And that's why I have the feeling that you are a happy person.
Well, and that's a real secret too. I think, to thy own self be true. If each of us can spend some time, and I know that coaching that I did in my 30s was incredibly important in getting in touch with who I am. But I think each of us has to really find out what it is that makes us tick and find work that really is aligned with what that is. And that's what I try to do in my search work, because not every person that has the qualifications is a good fit for my client. And it is sometimes going through 50 or 100 of the folks that have the qualifications to find that person that I think is really going to be a good cultural fit in that company. And I think with each of us with our jobs, that same effort is necessary. I see so many people that are unhappy in the work they've done, and usually it's because they're trying to, swim upstream. Whereas if they really understood themselves better, they'd be in a work environment that is more aligned with who they are personally.
Wow, that's a fantastic way to say thank you for your time, Brandt. I think our listeners are going to have a lot to think about also on the work-related aspect. Are we doing what makes us happy, and can we make any changes where we would feel more fulfilled in our professional lives, and that way taking a step forward to a happier life. So thanks so much for joining me. And I do wish you and your wife a fantastic little date today.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you for allowing me to tell my story.
Thank you, Brandt. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And until the next time.